Vlad rides through open countryside alongside Gerda, his newly appointed squire. The contrast to what we just witnessed could not be more deliberate. Here, there are no drawn swords, no death, just two people on a road approaching a small, peaceful-looking settlement that Gerda points out in the distance. Wisteria Village, Gerta's hometown. Vlad takes in the view. He notes, with a straightforwardness that suits his character, that the place looks quiet, peaceful. Gerta thanks him, visibly moved by the fact that he's finally here after all this time. Vlad brushes off the gratitude with the easy logic of a knight who doesn't make a ceremony out of kindness. They were headed toward a nearby city anyway, he notes. Stopping by on the way made practical sense, but then he asks Gerda something more personal. He wants to know how long it's been since his squire last set foot here. Gerda thinks about it and arrives at the answer slowly. 6 years. Vlad absorbs that quietly. 6 years, he says, is a long time. Gerda looks down at the road. He admits what he had been carrying with him all this time. The hope that when he finally came home, it would be in triumph. That he would return, having accomplished something worth returning for. Things didn't go exactly as he'd planned, he says. The words carry the weight of a man who has learned to hold his disappointments with both hands. Before he can say more, Vlad cuts him off, but not harshly. His words are measured and direct. Gerda has become a squire of Bayezid. That is not nothing. That is not failure. In times like these, Vlad adds, simply surviving and finding your way back is already a remarkable thing. Gerta laughs, a genuine laugh, a little surprised by it. He concedes the point. Then his mood lightens entirely. He says he just wants to check in on his mother and his siblings, make sure they're doing well, and then he'll be right back out. And then Vlad asks, almost casually, whether Gerta's mother is a good cook. The question delights Gerta more than perhaps anything else in the conversation. He answers with the unambiguous pride of someone who grew up eating something truly exceptional. His mother's potato stew, he says, is on an entirely different level. Vlad replies with a quiet smile. In that case, perhaps they should stay a couple of days. Gerta, barely containing his surprise and joy, stammers a question. Is that really all right? Vlad's response is perfectly calibrated. It depends entirely on the cooking. Gerta whips around and points ahead with fresh energy, announcing that they're almost there. The warmth of that exchange dissolves quickly. At the main entrance to Wisteria Village, 3 young militiamen move to block their path. They demand identification and state their purpose in the flat, practiced tone of people who consider themselves to have authority. For a place that is supposed to be Gerta's home, the reception is immediately pointedly unwelcoming. Gerta spots the leader of the group, a man named Thompson, someone he clearly grew up with, and calls out to him by name, relieved to see a familiar face. Thompson's response is studied indifference. He pretends with barely convincing effort not to recognize the man standing in front of him. Gerda fills in the details, the mill house on the hill, their shared history. Thompson performs a slow, theatrical moment of recollection before dropping back into a cold formality. He asks how long it's been, where Gerta has been all this time. His words are technically welcoming but carry no warmth whatsoever. Behind Thompson, the 2 younger guards whisper to each other. One asks who the traveler is. The other explains, the second son from the mill house. The first guard scoffs and uses a dismissive slur under his breath. From horseback, Vlad hears every word. He watches the exchange without reacting visibly, but the observation sharpens his reading of the situation. He notes to himself, with quiet precision, that a homecoming after 6 years shouldn't feel this cold. Thompson speaks again, this time in a tone that wraps hostility in the language of civic concern. He says he's glad Gerta is back, but advises him to keep his head down, stay out of trouble, and leave quickly. The village, he says, has been tense lately. The atmosphere has been restless. He makes it sound like a warning and a dismissal at the same time. Gerta, startled, agrees to stay only a day or 2. Thompson nods, then adds one condition. Before entering, Gerta is to go directly to the village chief's house and announce himself there first. Gerta steps forward, agreeing to the condition. That's when the militiamen move again, this time to block Vlad himself. Thompson looks up at the knight on horseback and demands his name and his business in the village. Gerta immediately steps in, explaining that this man is his honored guest. Thompson fires back that this is exactly why he needs to verify the visitor's identity. Gerta's voice rises. He orders them to stand aside. side. Thompson doesn't move. Instead, he does something that, in any gathering of people who understood the world's power dynamics, would be recognized as an extraordinary miscalculation. He shifts into a combat stance. He levels the point of his spear directly at Vlad and demands his name one final time. Vlad stares down at the spear tip. He looks at Gerda. He takes in the scene. His squire, someone who has pledged their service to the house of Bayezid, being dismissed and condescended to by village militiamen who see only a millhouse boy who left and came back with nothing. A slow, quiet anger begins to build behind Vlad's eyes. His expression tightens into something that is not quite fury, but is considerably worse. A cold, deliberate intensity that arrives before the storm does. He clicks his tongue. The air changes. The temperature of the standoff drops without anyone moving. The militiamen feel it before they understand it. A pressure, something radiating outward from the man on horseback that has nothing to do with the physical space between them and everything to do with the gap between what they are and what he is. They begin to sweat. Their hands tighten on their weapons, not in aggression, but in something that is already closer to fear. Vlad speaks. He introduces himself. A knight of Bayezid. And as he does, he releases a controlled pulse of his power into the air around him, directed squarely at the three men who made the mistake of standing in his way. His warhorse matches him, baring its teeth, aggressive and fully attuned to its rider's mood. The effect is immediate. The militiamen are not just intimidated, they are suffocated. The weight of Vlad's aura presses down on them like something physical. They cannot breathe properly. They cannot think clearly. They simply endure it, trembling, until Vlad is satisfied. Then he pulls it back. The guards gasp for air. Vlad tells them, without raising his voice, that if they understand their position, they should clear the path. Now they bow, they apologize, they scramble out of the way. As Vlad rides into the village, Gerda falls into step beside him, deeply embarrassed. He begins to apologize. The guards acted that way because it's been so long, he says. People forget. Things got complicated. Vlad doesn't scold him. Instead, he does something that hits harder than any reprimand could. He reaches down and hands Gerda the official flag of their faction, the Bayezid banner that marks their identity and rank. Then he holds Gerda's gaze and speaks plainly. Gerda is no longer the person who left this village 6 years ago. He is not a wandering blade for hire. He is not the forgotten second son from the mill house on the hill. Every action he takes now, no matter how small, carries the weight of the house he serves. The duty of a Bayezid squire is not just a title, it is something he carries in how he stands, how he speaks, and how he allows himself to be treated. The words settle over Gerda like armor being buckled on for the first time. He straightens. Something returns to his posture that wasn't there a moment ago. He looks ahead and tells Vlad clearly, with quiet conviction, that he will lead the way. Together they ride deeper into the settlement, but the chapter isn't done. Inside the village chief's manor, the news of their arrival has already spread. The chief has just received word that the second son of the mill house has returned, and that he appears to have come back as the squire of a genuine knight. The chief processes this information with visible unease. Seated beside him, the chief's son reacts with loud, contemptuous laughter. He dismisses the claim outright, mocking the idea that someone with Gerda's reputation could have risen to such a position. The informant, speaking carefully, notes that while the claim is suspicious, the militia reported something genuinely unsettling about the traveler at the gate. A presence and an atmosphere that went beyond anything they had encountered before. This gives the chief pause. He sits with the information, troubled. Gerda chose, of all times, to come back now, during a period when the village is already on edge, already under the shadow of larger forces. The informant pushes further, suggesting that the potential for trouble justifies precaution. He mentions that a mercenary group dispatched by Baron Ross is currently stationed within the territory. Perhaps, he suggests, they could be put to use. The chief's son explodes at this. Wasting an elite mercenary unit on something this trivial, he argues, would make his father look incompetent in the Baron's eyes. The chief weighs it and agrees. There's no need to involve the Baron over something this minor. And then the chief's son turns to his father with a quiet request. He asks to be given control of the situation himself. There is something in his expression that goes beyond ambition or irritation. His eyes carry a specific kind of intent. The look of someone who has been waiting for an opportunity, who sees in Gerda's return not a nuisance but an opening. He has, he says softly, something he intends to take back from Gerda. A narrow path leads up to a rustic mill house, weathered wood, a slow wheel turning in the current. And it's here that Vlad and his squire, Got, finally arrive after days of hard travel. For Got, this isn't just a stop along the road. This is home. The reunion with his mother is immediate and unfiltered. She sees her son and the emotions spill out out before she can compose herself. She apologizes to Vlad for showing such a disheveled side of herself at their very first meeting. Flustered, embarrassed, trying to maintain some dignity in front of a knight. Then she turns to Got and asks him point blank why he suddenly burst into tears. And just like that, the composed reunion dissolves entirely. Both mother and son are clinging to each other, absolutely inconsolable, putting on a display that could generously be described as theatrical. Standing to the side with a deadpan expression, Vlad remarks in his characteristically dry way that for the record, Got was the one who started crying first. Once the tears are wiped away, the group settles around the dining table. Got's mother fusses over the food, apologizing for not having meat to offer, worried the meal won't meet a knight's standards. She sets a large bowl of steaming potato stew in front of Vlad and immediately begins listing everything she wishes she'd had time to prepare differently. Vlad waves off her worries without hesitation. He tells her that after days of gnawing on nothing but hard jerky, sitting down to a hot, home-cooked meal is more than enough. He picks up his spoon, takes a bite, and visibly pauses. Something shifts in his expression. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just a quiet, genuine surprise, like a man who just tasted something better than he expected. Got catches that look immediately and practically lights up, triumphant, insisting he told his captain so. That his mother's potato stew is something else entirely. His mother turns red, quietly scolding Got for being so forward in front of their guest. But Vlad flashes a rare, completely unguarded smile and confirms it. The stew is excellent. Simple words, but delivered sincerely. Got's mother is quietly moved, pressing a hand to her chest as she thanks him. Then the atmosphere shifts. His mother sighs with relief, offhandedly mentioning how glad she is that her son, who barely stayed in touch over the years, managed to return just in time for his younger sister Marie's wedding. The spoon stops halfway to Got's mouth. He freezes. His eyes go wide, and then it all spills out of him. Stunned, frantic disbelief that his little sister is getting married. The news hits him like a wall. Got's mother looks at him hopefully and asks if he can stay, just long enough to see Marie walk down the aisle. Sensing his hesitation, and clearly not wanting to put him in a difficult spot, she gently asks if he needs to leave right away. Got glances over at Vlad, torn. Without looking up from his bowl, Vlad answers the question before it's even asked. He mentions calmly that the stew is good enough that he could eat it for a few more days. That's all he says. No grand gesture, no performance, just a knight who respects his squire enough to let him have this. Got beams, shouts a grateful thanks to his captain, and immediately asks for seconds. Later, while Got settles in with his family, Vlad steps outside. He walks his horse up to a grassy hill overlooking the village rooftops and takes in the full picture from a distance. It's a peaceful looking place, he thinks, well organized. The kind of settlement where the people seem to keep to themselves and go about their days without causing trouble. Nothing outwardly alarming, but something nags at him. He watches the villagers moving through the lanes below, and his trained eye picks up on a detail that doesn't fit. The village watch, the local patrol, is far too large for a settlement of this size. Double what you'd expect, maybe more. He thinks back to the guard at the gate who gave them a quiet warning when they arrived. Keep a low profile and consider leaving early, because things have been tense around here lately. Vlad crosses his arms and turns the pieces over in his mind. Something happened in this village recently, something that made the people jumpy and the patrols heavy. He doesn't know what it is yet, but his instincts have never steered him wrong. His horse snorts beside him. He glances down the hill. A group of village men passes below, casting sideways glances up in his direction. Distrustful, guarded, Vlad exhales quietly and notes to himself that it seems Got has entirely lost their confidence here, and that whatever cloud hangs over this village, it's been here long enough to seep into everyone's posture. Then a larger group comes into view. A cluster of armed men, moving with purpose and fury, making their way straight toward the mill house. At the front walks a broad, heavy-set young man, the village chief's son. Vlad watches from the hill and thinks to himself with dry humor that this certainly is a spirited welcoming ceremony. The chief's son, Thomas, stops in front of the mill house and screams Got's name into the air. His face is flushed with rage. He demands the young man step outside and answer for abandoning his debts and disappearing in the middle of the night. The threats that follow are colorful, specific, and escalating. The wooden door slowly opens. Got steps out with the expression of a man who just woke up from a nap he didn't want to be disturbed from. He sighs at the noise, notes that he'd been looking forward to resting after a proper home-cooked meal, and strolls down the walkway with his hands loose at his sides. He glances at the crowd trailing behind Thomas and wonders aloud why the man needed to bring so many people. He could have simply waited until Got came to find him. Then he addresses the accusation directly. Running away in the dead of night, he considers that framing a bit dramatic. The night was clear, he was looking at the moon, and he left. That's all. Thomas's face goes red, the veins on his forehead surface. He screams that taking someone's money and vanishing without a word is the exact definition of running from a debt, and he presses in close, using every inch of his larger frame to try to make Gott feel small. But Gott doesn't move. Standing there looking up at the furious man, something quietly shifts in him. He finds himself almost amused, not mockingly, but genuinely bewildered by his own reaction. He remembers a time when a moment like this would have made him shake. He would have looked at the ground, mumbled something, and backed away. Now it barely registers, and he understands exactly why. A flash crosses his mind. Vlad's glowing blue eye, that suffocating, contained pressure that radiates off his captain in those moments when he's fully serious. After standing next to that, day after day, facing a man who yells loudly and stands close, doesn't feel like danger. It feels like noise. Gott says Thomas hasn't changed at all, and adds that he almost feels sorry for him. Behind Thomas, the armed men begin murmuring among themselves. One remarks that Gott's whole demeanor is different, that the boy used to be unable to hold eye contact with Thomas at all. Gott then asks, without any anger in his voice, for the precise total of his debt. Principal plus every coin of accumulated interest. Thomas begins to say 1 gold and 50 silver, then quickly inflates the number to 2 gold coins. Without a word, Gott reaches into his coat and flicks a heavy coin pouch through the air. It hits Thomas square in the chest. Gott mentions he threw in an extra coin for good measure and considers the matter permanently closed. Thomas stares at the pouch in his hands. His expression darkens. The humiliation of being dismissed so casually by someone he spent years treating as beneath him curdles into something uglier. He hurls the pouch back, not at Gott, but past him, hard against the wooden doorframe of the house. The coins scatter. He demands to know how Gott came into that kind of money, accusing him of running some kind of elaborate con. For most of it, Gott keeps his composure, but then Thomas shifts his angle. He brings up the knight, the banner, the title, the whole presentation. He sneers that any knight who would accept a village dunce as his squire must clearly not be a real knight at all. He frames everything Gott has become as a performance, a lie, a joke for the village to laugh at. That's the line. Gott's calm evaporates. His hand drops to the hilt of his sword. Not drawn, not yet, but the grip is real, and the look on his face is something Thomas has never seen from him before. Footsteps on the gravel path. Vlad comes down the hill, horse in hand, completely unhurried. He steps into the scene the way someone steps into a room they've been in 100 times before, like he belongs there and always did. He comments that watching this kind of standoff feels almost nostalgic, like a piece of the neighborhood he grew up in. Thomas rounds on him immediately. He demands to know if this is the fake knight the fool dragged into their village. Vlad stops walking. He looks at Thomas with an expression that is perfectly even. No anger, no amusement, just a calm so deliberate it has weight to it. He asks quietly what Thomas plans to do if it turns out he's the real thing. Thomas laughs it off. He insists nobody in their right mind would make someone like Gott a squire and dismisses the entire situation as theater. Vlad considers the crowd in front of him. He thinks of Gott standing a few feet away, his squire, his responsibility in his hometown, and he decides, without any particular ceremony, to show a degree of restraint, just enough. He remarks that because this is Gott's home village, he'll let everyone here walk away. Then the aura comes. A towering, luminous blue energy erupts from Vlad's body. Massive, cold, and absolute. It doesn't threaten, it simply exists, and the effect on the crowd is instantaneous. Every man in that armed group goes silent. The bravado drains from their faces like water from a broken vessel. They are not afraid because of anything Vlad said. They are afraid because they can feel what he is, and it's nothing like anything they've encountered before. Inside the village manor, another conversation has been unfolding. A mercenary captain, a hard, weathered man who leads the Thornwood Company now stationed in the village for security, is confronting the village chief with barely concealed fury. He wants to know why no one thought to inform him the moment a stranger knight arrived. The chief tries to deflect, arguing that a real knight would never come to a settlement this small, and besides, it was just Gott who brought him, and Gott was never the type to run in serious circles. The mercenary captain is not appeased. He reminds the chief plainly that Thornwood is in charge of this village's security and that this authority comes from the Lord himself. This is their first real assignment in a permanent settlement, and if it goes sideways before they can even demonstrate their worth, they'll be back to wandering. He intends to use this situation to impress the Lord, not to let it spiral into chaos. Then a panicked villager bursts through the door. The man is breathless, barely coherent. He manages to get the words out. The supposed fake knight might actually kill Thomas. The chief erupts. He screams for the village watch to be called immediately. The mercenary captain curses under his breath, already moving. His men fall in behind him as he marches toward the sound of the commotion, vowing that whoever is threatening this settlement's stability is going to regret it. The captain arrives at the scene with his men, ready for blood and chaos. What he finds stops him cold. There is no body. There is no standoff. Vlad is laughing, genuinely, brightly, without a trace of malice, spinning a lasso in the air with the casual ease of someone enjoying a festival game. And beside him, his enormous dark horse appears to be joining in on the occasion, teeth bared in something that looks disturbingly close to a grin. Thomas, the chief's son, is flat on his back, not from a sword, not from an aura. He's been bowled over by the horse itself, launched backward with the full weight of the animal's rearing body, his face twisted in a combination of shock and undignified pain as the hooves continue their work. The mercenary captain stands there, taking in the scene, and then recognition sets in. The laughter, the horse, the aura, the presence, it all snaps into place. His jaw goes slack, his men go pale. In unison, the entire mercenary company begins to shake, staring at Vlad with wide, horrified eyes as they scream out in disbelief, demanding to know how on earth he is standing in this tiny, forgotten village like it's nothing. The chapter ends on that image, and Vlad's still laughing, Thomas still on the ground, and a group of hardened mercenaries who just realize they are very far out of their depth. Whatever these mercenaries know about Vlad, whatever history or reputation has just crossed their minds, it's clearly enough to shatter every ounce of confidence they walked into this village with. And with Thomas humiliated, debt settled, and a wedding still to come, the story is far from done.
Thomas, his young squire, is being hauled across the dirt behind Vlad's horse, bound by rope, beaten and bloodied, screaming desperately for anyone to intervene. His father, who also happens to be the village head, stands at the front of a small crowd of armed villagers, watching in horror as the scene unfolds before him. He shouts frantically for someone to act, his voice cracking with urgency as he urges the men around him to move. But these are not soldiers.
They are farmers and laborers holding spears they barely know how to use, and the sight of a knight bearing down on them at full gallop fills every one of them with a deeply reasonable kind of dread. The village head, furious and desperate, barks at them to at least raise their weapons, to do something. And they do. Shakily, uncertainly, the men level their spears in Vlad's direction as his horse thunders toward them without slowing down even slightly. Then the horse itself becomes part of the terror. Its eyes burn with something that looks far less like the gaze of a normal animal, and far more like the focused fury of a predator. Then it growls, not like a horse, like something far worse. The sound alone is enough to break what little resolve the villagers had managed to scrape together. They scatter, shielding themselves, unable to process what they are seeing. By the time Vlad brings the horse to an abrupt halt right in front of them, several of the men have already crumpled to the ground, completely overwhelmed. Vlad surveys the wreckage of their resistance without expression and demands to know which one of them is the village head. The man himself remains frozen where he stands, unable to step forward. Vlad's gaze drops briefly to Thomas, battered, one eye swollen red, teeth missing from the beating, and he makes no attempt to disguise his contempt. He raises his voice again, demanding to know who among them had the audacity to disrespect a knight. The village head, still in shock, mutters something about Vlad possibly being an imposter. That small comment changes the atmosphere entirely. It is Stefan, the captain of the mercenary group hired to protect this village, who steps in. His warning is quiet but absolute. He tells the village head plainly that if he were standing in his position, he would already be on his knees. The village head pushes back, pointing to the numbers on his side. Dozens of men versus one, he argues. Surely Stefan and his crew could tip the balance if they simply took the lead. Stefan exhales slowly. He tells the village head to look more carefully at what is standing in front of him. Not a man surrounded by enemies, but a predator studying a flock of sheep. The smile on Vlad's face at that moment says everything Stefan's words cannot. Stefan then calmly announces that his group is withdrawing. One of the peasants erupts in protest, reminding them that they were paid specifically to handle situations like this. Stefan turns to face him with the kind of look that ends conversations. He clarifies who actually hired them, Baron Rosmitz, the true lord of this village, and makes it unmistakably clear that a villager who has spent his whole life coddled by peace has absolutely no standing to question how men like Stefan operate. The mercenaries fall silent, and so do the peasants. One of Stefan's subordinates steps forward and delivers the final blow to whatever confidence the villagers had left. He tells them to drop their weapons. He explains, without any room for doubt, that Vlad is a real knight, one capable of cutting them down with nothing more than a wooden sword if the mood struck him. Then Stefan does something that reframes the entire confrontation. He walks straight to Vlad and bows. Deeply, respectfully. His men follow without hesitation. Vlad acknowledges him as Captain Stefan, noting that it has been some time. The watching villagers are stunned into silence. They had assumed these mercenaries were a potential ally. Instead, they are watching them show deference to the very man they were supposed to oppose. The village head's blood runs cold. A real knight. The legal weight of that title settles over him like a stone. Knights hold the authority to execute for disrespect, immediately, legally, without consequence. He is calculating the full scope of what he has done when Vlad turns toward him and speaks. He tells him he is fortunate, because Vlad is on vacation, and because of that, he is in a generous mood. The village head does not need to be told twice. His legs give out and he hits the ground. Inside the village head's home shortly after, the man remains on his knees. Vlad sits across from him and lays out his terms with the calm of someone who already knows how this ends. 3 gold coins for each villager who pointed a spear at him in the square. Separate charges for those who broke into his squire's home. And for the village head's own son. 10 gold coins. The village head stammers that this is financially impossible for a settlement their size. Vlad listens without sympathy and then offers the only alternative. Each man who raised a weapon against him will lose his left arm. The village head's son will lose both. No negotiations. No third option. The village head, pale and trembling, bows his head in silence. Vlad dismisses everyone from the room and asks to speak with Stefan alone. When the door closes, Stefan exhales and admits that watching Vlad work left him genuinely unsettled. There is clearly more beneath that composed exterior than he had anticipated. Vlad responds without blinking. He had genuinely been weighing whether to make a demonstration. Stefan stares at him for a moment, then quietly notes that nothing about that sounds like humor. The 2 men settle in with drinks, and the conversation shifts. Vlad asks what brought Stefan, a man of considerable skill, all the way out to a place like this. Stefan explains that after the job in Tonobo, their earnings had been healthy. The countryside felt like a change of pace at first, but the work out here was small, repetitive, and far beneath what the group was capable of. They needed something larger, and this contract with Baron Rosmitz was the answer. Vlad presses for details about the job itself. Stefan acknowledges the protocol around contract confidentiality, then admits it barely qualifies as a secret anymore. Everyone connected to the situation already understands what is coming. A war. A territorial conflict of the type that nobles have always enjoyed at everyone else's expense. What makes the situation particularly dangerous, Stefan explains, is that the so-called bandits raiding the surrounding area are not bandits at all. Their movements are too clean, too coordinated. Hit-and-run operations executed with the precision of trained soldiers. In Stefan's assessment, these raids are nothing more than a prelude, a systematic effort to establish approach routes before an official declaration of war against Marcia. Vlad asks what Baron Rosmitz is doing to prepare. Stefan's answer is blunt. The Baron is intentionally leaving certain villages exposed. They are, in strategic terms, expendable. Human shields bought with time while the Baron assembles troops and secures a defensive perimeter. Stefan and his group have no intention of being part of that calculation. They are leaving by the end of the week. Before the conversation closes, Vlad asks one final question. Who is Rosmitz's enemy? Stefan names House Fellows. The name lands differently than Stefan expects. He notices something shift in Vlad's expression. Not recognition exactly, but something deeper, something older. Vlad turns the name over quietly, and then the memories come without invitation. Juerger. A brutal fight. A man whose skill was worth studying from a distance. And then a darker image. A house consumed by fire in the night, bodies scattered across the ground, and standing at the center of it all, a knight gripping a sword still wet with blood. A man known as the Mudboar of Central. The name Fellows and those memories are connected. and whatever that connection is, it is clearly something Vlad has not yet finished with.
A village has been reduced to ash and smoke, bodies scattered through the wreckage. At the center of it all sits a broad, mustached knight, eating calmly atop the corpses of the people he's just slaughtered. One of his men approaches and reports that the job here is finished. The knight, Colin, doesn't even glance up. He simply asks if they found anything worth taking, or if the whole raid was a waste. His subordinate admits the village had almost nothing, but quickly adds that the next target should be far more rewarding. It's a settlement near the city of Marcia, and its chief is said to be a former tax collector. That detail alone is enough to change Colin's mood entirely. A man who once collected taxes for a living almost certainly has money hidden away somewhere. Colin grips his sword and asks for the village's name. He's told it's Wisteria village. He repeats it back to himself, savoring the sound of it, already imagining the gold waiting for him there. With that, his company sets out toward the unsuspecting village, while somewhere within it, a man named Vlad is already waiting. The next day shifts to a completely different mood. In Wisteria village, a wedding is underway. The whole community has gathered to celebrate the marriage of a local woman named Marie, and the square is filled with laughter, music, and dancing. A pig roasts on a spit nearby, and Marie's brother, Gott, walks over to thank Vlad for it. Vlad explains plainly that the village chief offered the pig as a gift, and that he simply knocked 1 gold coin off his payment in exchange. Gott laughs, certain his sister will be thrilled, and jokes that it almost feels like a blessing from a knight. Vlad brushes the comment off, noting dryly that he's no priest. He then changes the subject, asking whether the groom has family connections in Marcia. Gott confirms it, mentioning that the groom's relatives apparently run a respected textile business there. Vlad reminds him not to forget their earlier agreement. Once the ceremony ends, those relatives need to be sent toward Marcia immediately because time is short. Before Gott can ask why, the village priest arrives, and Vlad sends him off to join his sister for the ceremony. The moment Gott is gone, Stefan steps in to deliver a report. Their scouts have been watching the surrounding area closely, and the news isn't good. An armed group is approaching, and based on their pace, they're likely to reach the village by nightfall. That means preparations need to begin immediately. Vlad glances across the square at Marie standing before the priest, glowing with happiness, and quietly says that this moment is one worth protecting. He instructs Stefan to inform the village chief the instant the ceremony concludes. When he asks about the enemy's scouts, Stefan confirms their men have already pinpointed their location. Vlad nods and heads off without another word. The scene shifts to a cave hidden in the hills where a handful of Colin's scouts are resting around a campfire, clearly worn down by weeks on the road. One complains about the endless diet of dried rations, wondering how much longer this assignment will drag on. Another tries to keep morale up, reassuring the group that Colin will arrive soon, and that once this village is dealt with, a formal declaration of war is expected to follow. The Baron backing them has promised a substantial reward, so all they need to do is hold out a little longer. He adds that this particular village looks especially promising, well-organized farmland, and apparently enough prosperity to throw a full celebration despite everything. The mention of a feast catches the other men's attention immediately, and someone notes that there's even a roasted pig involved. Before the conversation can go any further, a new voice finishes the thought for them. Unfortunately, none of them will be eating any of it. Standing in the cave entrance is Vlad, sword already drawn, his expression cold. The scouts freeze in place, completely outmatched. By evening, Colin and his men reach the outskirts of the village and come to an abrupt halt. Hanging along the road are 3 of their own soldiers, crucified in plain view. Colin stares at the scene and asks for confirmation that these are truly his men. His subordinate confirms it without hesitation. Colin falls silent for a moment, processing the fact that soldiers far above the skill level of an average village guard were taken down without a single survivor returning. He concludes that someone with serious combat experience must be protecting this place, likely hired mercenaries or something close to it. When his subordinate asks how they should respond, Colin's answer is immediate. A message like this demands an answer in kind. Standing before the village gates, he roars out a challenge, demanding whoever is responsible reveal themselves, and threatens that if the gates don't open immediately, he'll slaughter everyone inside without exception. After a tense pause, the gates creak open, and Vlad walks out alone. He greets Colin with an unsettling calm, remarking that it's been a long time since their paths crossed, though clearly not under pleasant circumstances. Colin studies him, confused, and admits he doesn't recognize him at all. Vlad seems almost amused by this.
commenting that the encounter apparently left less of an impression on Colin than it did on him. Still struggling to place the face, Colin eventually catches something familiar in Vlad's relaxed expression and easygoing stance, and the memory finally clicks into place. A name surfaces in his mind tied to deep, simmering resentment, and his composure shatters instantly. Vlad draws his sword and introduces himself properly. He was once the squire of a man Colin clearly despised, a former mentor from Vlad's past, now long gone. Colin mutters to himself that the resemblance in posture, swordsmanship, and that same irritating smile is unmistakable. Consumed by fury, he hurls an insult at Vlad, branding him a lapdog of the noble house Vlad now serves, and charges forward with a strike meant to end the fight in a single blow. The attack lands with explosive force, kicking up a wall of dust and debris, but when it clears, Vlad is still standing, having caught the blow completely. Calmly, he corrects Colin, stating again that his name is simply Vlad. Enraged, Colin launches into a relentless series of attacks, swinging from every angle, but Vlad meets each strike with practiced precision, never wasting a single movement. Watching from behind, Colin's soldiers grow uneasy, until one of their officers orders them to follow their commander's lead and engage. The men raise their shields and begin advancing as a unit, only for an arrow to suddenly tear through one soldier's helmet. Archers stationed along the village walls open fire, forcing Colin's officer to call for a tight shield formation as they push forward. The defense holds against the volley, and the officer scoffs at the idea that a few arrows could turn the tide. That confidence vanishes the instant his men notice the ground beneath them has become slick. Before he can finish ordering a retreat, Stefan fires a flaming arrow from the walls, calmly noting that it pays to watch where you step. The oil-soaked earth ignites instantly, and fire rips through Colin's formation, plunging his soldiers into chaos and panic. Colin turns just in time to see his men scattering in flames, completely caught off guard by what's unfolding. He has no time to process it further because Vlad's voice cuts through the chaos behind him. At last, he says it's just the two of them now. Exactly the kind of fight he's been waiting for. Before tonight, Colin of House Pylos had been a name people respected out of fear. A knight big enough, strong enough, that lesser men simply got out of his way. Then came the duel. A public, merciless defeat at the hands of a knight named Jaeger, fought in front of nobles who would never let him live it down. There had been no excuse to hide behind, no clever explanation to save face. Just humiliation, total and undeniable. Stripped of standing and stripped of leverage, Colin was handed the ugliest job imaginable. Disguise himself as a common bandit and butcher an insignificant village to send a message on his lord's behalf. To a man who once commanded respect, it wasn't a mission. It was a punishment dressed up as an order. So Colin made peace with something ugly inside himself. If slaughtering strangers by the dozen, by the 100, was the price of clawing his reputation back, he would pay it without blinking. Guilt was a luxury he'd stopped affording himself the day he lost that duel, and yet here he stood, covered in blood that brought him no honor, staring at the one obstacle he never expected to see twice. A young swordsman he barely knew, dismissed in his mind as just another northern nobody. Vlad. The sight alone was enough to send Colin's fury past the point of reason. He swore that tonight would end with Vlad's severed head presented back home as proof of his triumph. Vlad barely reacted. He only mused, almost lazily, that a threat like that probably meant the bounty on his life had grown rather impressive, and then, without missing a beat, turned the question back on his opponent. How much exactly was Colin's own head worth? Before the words could even land, something in the air changed. A pressure that hadn't been there a second earlier began rolling off Vlad's blade, cold and absolute. While the two men squared off, the rest of the battlefield had already decided most of Colin's army's fate without him. The mercenaries defending the village, led by their captain Stefan, had funneled Colin's soldiers straight into a blazing kill zone, and now loosed volley after volley of arrows into anything that still twitched inside the flames. Along the walls, a second, quieter fight played out. Villagers scrambling to douse the palisade before their own trap could burn down the very home it was meant to protect. By the time the smoke thinned enough to see clearly, every soldier Colin had brought with him was dead. Only their commander remained standing. Stefan, watching the duel from the walls, understood the truth better than anyone cheering the massacre around him. This slaughter wasn't the end of the danger. It was only the opening move. If Vlad lost this fight, no fire trap and no wall would save the village from what came next. Back at the center of it all, Colin finally got a real look at what he was up against. The pressure radiating from Vlad was suffocating, deep.
The kind of presence that had no business belonging to someone so young. For one honest second, disbelief cracked through his rage. How could a peasant claw his way to this level of power so quickly? But pride is a hard habit to break, and Colin convinced himself that raw physical strength would still settle this. He threw everything he had into a single crushing overhead strike, meant to end the fight before it truly began. It didn't end anything. Vlad caught the blow cleanly, and worse, held his ground without so much as a stagger. When Colin bore down harder, trying to simply grind his opponent into submission through sheer force, Vlad redirected the pressure in one fluid motion, sending the massive blade sliding uselessly into the dirt. Metal shrieked against metal, and for a moment the sound alone seemed to hang in the smoke-filled air. Then Vlad said something that broke what little composure Colin had left. Almost gently, he asked whether that particular sound felt familiar, a quiet, deliberate echo of the humiliation Jaeger had handed him not long ago. The mockery worked exactly as intended. Whatever control Colin had left dissolved into something closer to madness, and he unleashed a wild, screaming assault with no strategy left in it at all. Vlad turned that recklessness against him. Watching how Colin planted his feet before every strike, he identified the true source of the man's overwhelming power. Not talent, not technique, but a rigid, immovable stance rooted straight into the ground. One precise strike shattered that foundation completely, and for the first time all night, Colin felt the earth itself betray him. What followed stopped looking like a duel and started looking like a lesson. Disoriented and increasingly desperate, Colin found himself facing an opponent whose fighting style refused to settle into any single predictable shape, as if several master swordsmen were taking turns behind the same blade. Every attack he threw was read, redirected, or punished before he could even recover his footing. In the middle of that relentless exchange, with their swords locked and sparks raining down around them, Vlad asked a question that had nothing to do with the fight itself. Where did Colin believe he stood in this world? It wasn't an insult. For Vlad, it was the same question that had quietly driven his entire journey. Not the need to win, but the need to finally know his own place in something far bigger than himself. Colin, furious and completely lost on the meaning, screamed back that the answer was standing right in front of him, and threw everything he had left into one final, desperate strike meant to prove exactly that. Vlad didn't meet it head-on. He tracked the blade calmly, waiting until the very last possible instant, and in that brief pocket of silence, allowed himself a quiet, private moment of gratitude toward the man who had unknowingly handed him the answer he'd been chasing all along. Then he moved. One overwhelming counter shattered Colin's stance completely, wrenched the weapon out of position, and left him with nothing to defend himself with. The final thrust was clean, decisive, and impossible to stop. Colin, once the proud representative of House Pylos, fell in the same fire he had lit trying to reclaim his honor. Standing alone beneath the pale moonlight, Vlad allowed himself only the briefest moment of stillness. He wasn't thinking about the man he had just defeated. He was thinking about how much farther he still had left to climb, and how, for the first time in a while, that distant goal felt just a little closer than before. But hundreds of miles away, in a grand hall untouched by any of tonight's bloodshed, an entirely different kind of celebration was beginning. A commander received the news he'd been waiting on for what felt like forever, permission granted from somewhere far higher up the chain than anyone bleeding out in that village could possibly imagine. His laughter rolled through the hall as he gave 2 orders in the same breath. Drag before him the woman who dared to call herself the gatekeeper of the North, and bring him the severed head of the boy who had the audacity to steal his son's sword. Somewhere out there, a far bigger storm was already gathering, and Vlad, still catching his breath over a single defeated enemy, had no idea it was already headed straight for him.
In a war camp stretched across the northern grassland, banners bearing the mark of the Vatican and the Dragon Slayer Knight Orders snapped in the wind. Inside the command tent, Bishop Pierre sat across from a red-haired noble who seemed almost bored by the entire arrangement. This was Radu Dragulia, a man with his father's blue eyes and, quite literally, dragon blood running through his veins. For 2 months, Pierre had watched this army sit idle, while he burned with frustration underneath his composed exterior. He wanted to know why. Radu's answer was maddeningly simple. He was waiting, not for a sign from God, not for a strategic opening, but for a single word from his father, the man known only as the Dragonblood Duke. That answer alone should have been enough to unsettle any reasonable man. But it was the ice behind Radu's eyes when he said it that finally made the truth land on Pierre like a physical blow. This so-called holy war had never belonged to the church at all. It had never been about faith or justice or rooting out some unnamed evil. It was bait, a massive, terrifying presence planted deliberately in the north to freeze two great powers, the Iron Duke and the Northern Alliance, in place through sheer dread. As Pierre stepped out of that tent into the daylight, he understood, with a sinking heart, that he and his entire order had been used as nothing more than a smokescreen for someone else's game, and that the true violence, when it finally came, would be settled the old-fashioned way, with steel. While that quiet, cold-blooded scheme unfolded in the east, an entirely different kind of desperation was tearing through a small village near the border. Word of the coming war had already reached the people there, and panic did what panic always does. It emptied streets and packed carts in a matter of hours. The village chief screamed at his fleeing neighbors to stay, but no one listened anymore. One man told him bluntly that their earlier survival had only ever been thanks to a knight and a handful of mercenaries who happened to be around. Ordinary villagers standing alone against an army was a fantasy, not a plan. It was a brutal, unwelcome kind of clarity, but it was the truth. And truth doesn't wait for permission to be heard. In the middle of that chaos stood Vlad, watching his squire Gott say goodbye to his own family, the same family he'd only just been reunited with after 6 long years apart. Gott tried to hide the tears, and Vlad, in his usual blunt way, called him out on it instantly, but underneath the teasing was something gentler. Vlad gave Gott an order that caught the boy completely off guard. Go with them. Not as a punishment, not as a dismissal. A long, well-earned leave, so Gott could keep his family safe instead of watching a war do to them what it had already done once before. Vlad pressed a heavy pouch of coin into his squire's hands before he left. A quiet acknowledgement of just how expensive safety was about to become for everyone fleeing north. Gott, overwhelmed, could barely get a proper thank you out. Vlad simply told him to go, and to come running the moment word reached him again. With his squire gone, Vlad turned north with Stefan and his Thornwood mercenaries at his back, riding straight into colder, harsher terrain. Stefan grumbled the whole way about the sudden drop in temperature, half joking that summer was supposed to be right around the corner. Vlad's only reply was a quiet warning that the cold Stefan was feeling now was nothing compared to what waited ahead. Beneath the banter, though, something more serious was taking shape. Stefan admitted his real reason for staying close to Vlad. In a world sliding toward chaos, a mercenary who chose his employer carelessly was signing his own death warrant. He'd watched Vlad closely enough by now to see past the rough edges. Real loyalty toward his squire, real respect for the men following him, and a level of raw talent that made betting on this particular night feel less like a gamble and more like an obvious move. That easy rhythm between them broke in an instant. Vlad's hand shot up, halting the entire group cold. Something, or someone, was approaching through the trees, and whoever it was clearly wasn't bothering to hide. Roughly 20 riders emerged from the tree line, moving with a confidence that immediately told Vlad these weren't ordinary travelers. A chill crept up his spine that had nothing to do with the northern air. When the hooded riders finally stopped in front of them, one figure stepped forward and lowered his hood, revealing a face marked by old scars. A face Vlad recognized instantly from a duel long past, when this very man had delivered grim proof of a nobleman's death. He was one of Bayezid's hidden blades, an operative loyal only to Lord Joseph Bayezid himself. He unrolled a sealed order and read Vlad's true summons aloud. Forget any plans of returning to Shawara for now. Instead, Vlad was to ride straight to the territory of Diamar and serve there openly as Lady Alicia's sworn knight. Vlad dropped to one knee without a second's hesitation, and even Stefan, utterly baffled but trusting his captain's instincts, followed suit, hissing at his own confused men to kneel and stop asking questions. Far away on a quiet hillside overlooking that very territory, something ancient and delighted stirred. Deomar's white spirit serpent, dozing lazily in the sun, suddenly lifted its head, catching a familiar scent carried on the wind from far beyond the border. It was a scent tied to memory, to nostalgia, to a boy it hadn't seen in far too long, and the creature could barely contain its joy, coiling excitedly through the branches as it sensed exactly who was on their way. Inside the manor itself, Alicia Haynal had no such comfort. Slumped over a desk buried in reports, she and her butler Duncan were doing the grim math of a losing war. Even scraping together every soldier she could summon, Alicia's forces barely reached 700 men, a number dwarfed by the army massing under Gaidar, the ruthless conqueror threatening from the west. Mercenary captains she'd approached had all quietly declined to get involved, unwilling to gamble their lives on a fight this lopsided. Her only real comfort was the alliance with House Bayezid, a name powerful enough that even Gaidar couldn't simply ignore it without consequence. Then a knock broke the tension. Guests had arrived, and they were from Bayezid. Alicia shot up so fast she nearly knocked her own knee into the desk, her exhaustion evaporating in an instant as hope flooded in. She was certain, in that fluttering half-second of anticipation, exactly who was about to walk through that door. But when it finally opened, it wasn't Vlad standing there. It was Vorden, one of Joseph's veteran knights, offering a respectful bow and none of the reassurance she'd been quietly hoping for. Meanwhile, still leagues away, Vlad rode on with the hooded operative who'd taken to calling himself Marcus, a name he'd clearly invented on the spot, and one he seemed strangely proud of. As they traveled, Marcus arranged for Stefan's mercenaries to be formally hired, praising their unusually high loyalty in a trade built on betrayal and desertion. Then, without warning, a crow descended and landed on his outstretched arm, delivering some urgent message that hardened his expression instantly. Marcus announced they were parting ways here, refusing to explain why, only pressing one final, urgent command into Vlad's mind before vanishing into the tree line. Ride for DMR now. Alicia needed him, and whatever storm was closing in around her, it wasn't going to wait for him to arrive in his own time. As Vlad pushed his horse harder into the freezing north, one thought settled heavily in his chest, that somewhere ahead, the sky over Alicia's world was already beginning to fall, and he had no idea just how little time was left before it came crashing down on her completely.
If you're enjoying this series, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next recap. Drop a comment below.